I didn't want to, oh yes, I didn't want to make discussing ethics super sad. Um, so yeah, let's see. First of all, everyone, thank you for coming. It's our idea has been crazy today, so I appreciate that you guys took the time out to come to this one. Yeah, we'll be talking about science ethics and really what ethics is and why it's applicable to our lives as scientists, future doctors, lawyers, and everything in between. So yeah. Ooh, is it gonna let me do it? Oh, there we go. So firstly, what is ethics? It's a great question because even though we have a definition, we still don't have a definition. But yeah, ethics is based on well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe to humans what they should do in terms of, yeah, this is why you should do it because it's right, or no, that's wrong because society told you that's wrong. Um, and usually it is wrong. But to simplify that and make it more understandable to the average person is at the core of ethics, it's just a simple, not simple, but it's a system of moral principles that we follow. And it's something that's really widely discussed. Like, why do we have ethics and why are ethics even important? Like, why would we choose one thing over the other? Like, why does it make us feel that way? So I actually put this picture for that exact reason. He's choosing between two buttons. And it's really interesting, like test your theory that a person will never choose the red button because, or almost never choose the red button. I should never say never, because of the fear of it being wrong, because red is associated with error or stop. And I think that's an amazing way of describing ethics, because if you're given two options, your moral compass or the ethics that you have is going to tell you, I should probably choose the thing that doesn't seem as scary, regardless of what it is. So let's see. Oh boy. So why are they important to science? And this is just one of those questions that I think we need to all discuss. Like I said, oh no. Um, I think we all need to discuss because we are in, these science and pre-med and all these different fields. Because without ethics, science would run loose in ways that we shouldn't uh, condone. And I didn't put any examples on here, but one example I wanted to talk about was the Tuskegee Institute, the syphilis trial, where they injected syphilis into a bunch of men to see what would happen and what would happen if syphilis was just left by itself and they didn't tell those people. And I think that's a clear example of where ethics were breached and people were not given the fair opportunity to discuss or even have the option to say, no, I don't want to partake in this. And it was wrongfully done to them. So why are ethics important? And then before we do that, I want to ask a question. So obviously you guys can't be like me unless you want to turn on your mic, but who's pre-health or who has any sort of pre-health focus? Yeah, so a lot of you. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys do know, but what's the name of like ethics applied to health professionals? And then if anyone wants to get on the little mic and answer, that'd be fun. uh, and if not, also totally okay. Or chat. I just realized we have a chat. So yeah, there's that too.
Is it just medical ethics?
Technically, yes, but it's the Hippocratic Oath, so HIPAA. So whenever, you guys you guys become doctors and like save people's lives, you guys take the Hippocratic Oath to, not only keep their safety and keep their privacy known to them, but it also is a code of conduct when it comes to how you will ethically treat your patient. Yeah. And then who's engineering or like business fellow, pre-law, anything that's not pre-health focused, essentially. Yeah, I'm gonna raise my hand because it's me. And then the thing that they do, or something that's really common between all those fields that is in their code of conduct that they need to follow is, where is it? We hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, which also goes into having that ethical, moral obligation over doing right. Like you have to do right to your people, because if you're not doing right to those people, then why are you doing what you're doing? Especially when you're advocating for law, justice, and infrastructure. And I think that's really cool and important to discuss and talk about. So with that, scientific ethics are our code of conduct as researchers because they call for like honesty and integrity in what we're doing. It's not ethical to say you have a 97% confidence value, 95% if you will, and then not have it be replicable and at that level, and you know, lied about where your research came from, who did the research, and how the any of the things about your research. It's unethical because it breaches that honesty that as scientists we're supposed to be seeking, where people call scientists truth seekers because we're finding out things, you know? And I think what's really important about having that ethics in science is it teaches us as scientists and researchers that we have to be very honest with what we did and accept that we have failures sometimes because it will help others grow. And not only that, but it it builds integrity. It legitimately just builds integrity in what you believe in and what you're standing for, because if you're willing to be honest with your research or any part of the stage of your scientific practice, what's going to stop you from doing it in something that you deem less important? And that sort of breaches a lot of things when our scientific research is medical oriented or is, you know, infrastructure oriented or has anything that is going to affect large populations. Even if it's one person, it's unethical to treat them badly just because you have the opportunity to. Do you know what I mean? Um, yeah, and then I wanted to practice some ethical problem solving, and that's primarily what I wanted to do with this. I think it'd be really fun to have the opportunity either to do breakout rooms or if everyone is more willing to just have a discussion together, let's do some ethical problem solving. So the first question I want to ask, and I want you guys to jump in, and then I'll facilitate it, is should creatures other than humans have rights? So should a cow have the same rights that you and I do, for instance? Or even going farther, should something that's called synthetic life that was made in a lab, should that be considered a human or should it have rights? And that's, you know, I don't want to get too deep on that because that might, you know, lead into a weird rabbit hole, but it's a good question to discuss what ethics and science are, especially when a majority of you guys are pre-med and going into fields where you have to deal with humans and human rights. So yeah, I'm gonna leave that open to discussion and you guys are open to talk and then I'll help facilitate.
We just pick one and go from there, or
Hmm.
what? Do we just pick one of these questions and
Well,
start?
I was going to talk about the first one. Should creatures other than humans have rights?
So how do you want to define rights? Because obviously, like, the right to like get a driver's license is going to be different than like the right to vote. And obviously, like, I don't want like a cow on the road. And obviously, but like, you know, if we find life that's
Mhm.
close to our intelligence, then it's an intelligence question, right? I mean, I don't. It's a weird. We have to like define an approach angle before we kind of answer this.
Mhm. Would you
Like,
care to define it? Like,
I think animals that lack, our understanding of consciousness and intelligence, we don't give rights, but we should give protections, right? You probably shouldn't start allowing, meat packing plants to kill things with buses, right? You don't just want a bunch of cows getting hit by a bus. But at the same time, again, like the rights, our rights just considered protections. And, if so, like what constitutes, like, where do we draw the line on what should be protected and what shouldn't be protected?
okay. Does anyone have anything else to input to that?
I feel like an important part is the developing field of intelligence and consciousness, right? Because I think there was like a movement, I don't know what time period, but people were like, animals don't feel anything. And then in recent times, we actually tested like, oh, octopi have intelligence or dolphins actually communicate. So I think it's easy to say. I mean, I think the main assumption of this question is creatures don't have the intelligence or consciousness of humans, but the bigger issue is like, what if we're quantifying their intelligence incorrectly or not realizing their communication? Obviously, I think in general, based on what we know about society today, that we're gonna say like, oh, dolphins don't deserve the same amount of rights as humans do. But I guess that's also a question. And also, one point about protections is also we have other kind of rationale, not just the creatures. Like we want to protect, elephants because if too many of them die, that's going to affect our ecosystem. So there's there's intelligence, consciousness, and then the environmental impact of what we do to creatures as well.
It's a really good point, bringing up how their right and protection is literally saving their environment, because we all live, in a system that cooperates and works together. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense when we say advocating for their rights, is advocating for their right to live in the sense of having an ecosystem that they can be a part of, so it's a very good point. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add?
I was going to add to that. By the way, that was like I'm happy that I didn't jump in because that was a very good way of putting it. And I don't have awesome words like that. But like, I was thinking specifically about, so like in my research, I work with bacteria, for example. And so I was thinking exactly that, like, we don't just use any E. coli strain, like they study E. coli at large. Like typically how scientists do it is they might study an organism at large. But at least with bacteria, then you have the opportunity to engineer a strain that is suitable for lab. And so I guess another question that can go in a rabbit hole down that is, well, is it right to make that synthetic life and then just use it in the lab? So that's not what I'm going to touch on, but it's something also to think about. But I do think if I were to answer that and to tie it back into the environmental, it is very useful to make those types of strains. That way, if you're introducing any lab conditions to them, they're not hopefully going to be released to an environment that would like not be sustainable in an actual ecosystem with all the niches that we already have established. And so it's good to sometimes in that way use cells or synthetic life to help with that versus like having like disrupting things that are already naturally occurring. So
I think that's a good way of putting it as well, and tying it, like you're saying, back into the environmental thing, which could, again, this is why ethics are so interesting, that it gives an even bigger connotation of what rights does the planet have, because then it's like, well, we're trying to protect its ecosystem because that's our right to protect it, because we have to have somewhere to live. And it's a fun rabbit hole to get down. So if you're ever bored and want to be on Wikipedia, look it up. It's quite interesting. Also sad. So those are great answers. I actually really enjoyed hearing what you guys had to say. So I'm gonna move to the second one, and it's, should we colonize other planets and stop the fight against climate warming? And and I'm gonna expand on that more, but like, what is the impact of people that, let's say, can't afford a ticket or something and they can't go to another planet? Do they still have the option? Should they still have the right, because right's a big word, to go to those other planets, or do they just stay here? What's that,
So in terms of like longevity of the species, colonizing other planets in our system is pretty much going to be a requirement. In terms of, it doesn't matter how efficient we are at recycling, at some point we'll start running out of stuff somewhere. And so just more room is always going to be better, and it's always going to be something we should strive for. Also, one planet is a very brittle thing for a single species to call home. So, a pandemic or whatever it wants to be, whatever apocalypse movie you want to play, two worlds is, it gives you two shots to mess up instead of just one shot to mess up. And in terms of how colonizing would work of another planet, it would depend on if it was governmental or private, and it would also depend on what laws and other things would constitute. It's not ever going to be another Wild West, but it will still be more wild than Earth is now. So what is allowed, right? And with immigration into the New World, for example, in the 1500s and stuff, how poor people usually got over is you usually need someone to keep the land up and do the stuff that no one wants to do. So for better or worse, the rich usually bring the poor along because someone's got to do the work, and we kind of have a hierarchy and a pattern that we like to follow as a species. So it's not just going to be all the Elon Musk, and Bill Gates. It's going to be plenty of poor, possibly indentured servants, doing what we've always done.
All right. Thank you for sharing.
That like you bring that up because I mean it's kind of hard to imagine anything else. I mean, humans are so well adapted to this planet because we've had, 20,000 years of evolution that make us pretty good at what we do here. So to go elsewhere, we'd need thousands of years to adapt, to evolve, to undergo something else, and then perhaps a different process of speciation starts taking place. And unfortunately, our human history, we're really good at discriminating between each other, and obviously we wouldn't want any of that kind of conflict to ensue. But I think it's just interesting that you brought it up, Bronson. Can you imagine like a planetary pandemic and like intergalactic quarantine? That's just like, how would you enforce that?
Masks in space, obviously.
Well, it also brings up though, how would something like that even be governed, right? But for the most part, any large form of colonization won't happen for, if we look historically, like 50 to 100 years after the first unlucky or lucky individuals get to go and plant flags and build their stock prices up and do whatever they need to do, right? Usually we don't see there's not going to be a Roanoke or Jamestown for a very long time. We're going to need some, people will usually sit there and set something up and map out something and say, hey, don't put anything on that rock over there. It's a real bad idea. So as anything like that would happen, we would get a better understanding of what we'd even be working with, right? Just more information, because all we really have to go for right now is what we've seen with our own planet. And that may not be accurate to what we would see on another planet.
Okay, so let's say that we colonize, Mars. Should that then mean that we stop the fight over any form of keeping Earth's environment, just like any form of sustainability on Earth? Should we just stop? Like, is it a wasted effort? Or should we keep trying just to keep it as not a fail-safe, but as something that we can have? Is that even something that you should do?
I think the fight for climate change and environmental protections would actually increase with a second planet, because who cares about the barren, low atmosphere of Mars, right? They don't have any rivers. They don't have any squirrels that, are going to get mad when we dump tons and tons of lead into whatever. So it would be hey, no, companies, as long as you just do what you need to do on Earth, make Earth our lovely, pretty home, we don't care if you start dumping your trash and stuff on this extra world that we have, right? And it would be very similar, again, because I love my history.
So you're not being very, you don't even know about the galactical impact that pouring a bunch of elemental lead on a different planet can do. I get what you're saying, but I guess to me, we kind of drifted a bit from what I was going to say about the question is, we definitely should colonize for survival, but I think we have to question, if we hop ship and just leave Earth to be destroyed, then we're just going to destroy everything we touch, right? You have to ask yourself, what is our goal and plan? And it kind of reminds me of Wall-E, right? Where every human just became obese and didn't care about anything, and then was just, destroyed Earth and then left it behind and kept traveling from planet to planet. We don't want to do that either and just destroy everything we touch. And then we don't even know about aliens. If we poured lead on Mars and then killed a whole other species that was smart as us, I feel that's a good point, that we could definitely use a different planet for sustainability, I guess. But I definitely think we don't even know anything about the galaxy, right? So it's we should probably be careful if we're going to do that.
Is it bad to think that our colonization might be accidental? Because if you look at history, most people, well, we didn't know anything about the New World when the European powers were sending people over, and a lot of them, constantly asked for resources from Europe and all that. So I mean, that's what it's going to rest on. It's going to be resources from Earth because we don't really have anything else, unless we find, I don't know, some cool way to farm asteroids in space or something on the way to Mars. But uh, then Mars colonization, as it stabilizes, it's going to be its own thing. So it's, I don't know, it's difficult to think about. We can't just abandon Earth if we colonize Mars successfully. I mean, that would be the equivalent of, oh, we discovered Roanoke, let's leave Europe, and then Roanoke fails, like we'll fail as a species. So if we do colonize another planet or asteroid or whatever it be, I think we'd have to pour more into Earth because we're going to require more from Earth to keep that, to sustain that colony.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think also another thing would be any colonization effort, a majority of what would be done would be a lot of just raw materials and kind of stuff like that. I think of anything, again, coming into the climate, like I think Earth would become almost more important, right? Because right now, Earth is, supporting all of us, but when we have to start thinking about another planet, it would also have to we would really start having to make things more efficient. And I think there'd be a want to make this place cleaner and healthier and stuff, as almost we can't let those pesky colonists be better than us, right? There would be, at least for superpowers, there'd be a big incentive to show that Mother Earth is always going to be the bigger, the better, and the cleaner, right? So I at least think that, like, when it comes to like the fight for just making Earth better, there'd be an even bigger push because now there's a competition with a whole other planet, right? Because all we are worrying about right now is our theoretical survival, right? Whether it be 50 or 200 years. When are we going to die? Who knows? But with another planet, humans do a lot better when there's competition, right? And not just abstract concepts of the impending death of our species, right? And so I think the fight would get a little bit more competitive, and you would get a lot of business interests too of, well, look, we made this desert in I don't know, pick a continent. We made it a whole beautiful garden, and unlike Mars, they can never do anything like that on Mars. And so I think we'd see an incentive to be better because of the second option and new world that we would have to worry about.
Interesting. Also a very interesting discussion. Very curious. I'm very curious to ask you, Vito, and then you, Bronson, after more questions.
Yeah, I mean, you got kind of lucky that both your roommates are here and we have.
Yeah, honestly. Okay, next question. And I want to explain this question when I say it, but should governments make robot soldiers instead of putting humans in warfare? And I ask this because it goes back to that question a lot of people have in AI over who's held accountable when the AI does something bad. Is it the government, or is it the person that made the AI, or is it the people that voted yes? Like, who is held accountable in that stage when they start endangering and hurting human life? And does that then make a paradigm shift over which one's superior? It's a big question right now in science ethics. So
I kind of wanted to jump in with this, but I don't know if it's a little bit bridging or if it hits it on the mark. I'm not quite sure. I feel like it's maybe an in-between. But I haven't finished the whole thing yet, but I started watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix, like everyone's talking about right now, and how they talk about how people are specifically making algorithms for your news feeds, which a lot of people are familiar with, and they just know the word algorithm and that it involves some computer coding. But like what some people don't understand is like that they are making like codes where it identifies the types of things, like where it can identify your emotions. So like it'll identify things that make you mad. And so some social media outlets right now are purposely having coding running in the background to find things that'll make you mad. So it shows up on your news feed first. So that way it'll link you to more sharing, because you'll ultimately sharing your opinion that you're frustrated or angry or something. And since we went so much into like the planet and environmental and stuff, that's one of like the hot topics right now in the US with debates. And you see that frequently. And so I definitely think if you're trying to hold people like accountable for the environment, it is also important to keep like the media accountable for how they're like having us perceive the environment, good or bad, because I think that there's a lot of people doing good things to help it. I also think there's a lot of people doing bad things to help it. And so I think that a lot of these questions are complicated to answer just because it is such a collective force of the people physically enforcing it or making the laws about it versus how the media distributes it to help one person or another, one party or another. And so I'm really happy we're talking about this because it's a very complex thing. And so, yeah, that was just my 2 cents. But algorithms can detect emotions, which I didn't until I started watching this. I had no idea about. And so that is very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, for sure. I agree. I think that having the knowledge that algorithms can affect so much of it does affect so much of our daily life, and then putting that into a robotic soldier or putting it into something that's computerized can greatly impact just a lot of different things that we would never expect it to impact, because we don't even know how the algorithm's fully working sometimes. So yeah.
I think that when it comes to robotic soldiers, they would be a lot, for a very long time, they'd basically just be drones. And I don't mean, the drones we have now, I mean like only able to follow specific patterns. And so for even once integration of robots, like we're already seeing now in many countries, there would still have to be a human presence to quantify kind of what's going on. And so I think the question that's more interesting is robots killing. I mean, robots already kill now. Drones and a bunch of other applications, we already have machines ending human life. I think the question is, now every time someone dies, it's down to a human being, right? Every bullet that's fired is an infantryman or a drone operator or a pilot. But if you all have robots, you'd have one guy who could tell 50 robots, hey, I don't want that house there anymore. So it would come down to also, is it ethical to give that amount of power to one person?
Well, that's sort of like was the second part of my question, where I asked would we hold the developers accountable? Because we see it now. A lot of developers have their biases in their code whenever it looks at faces, and you can tell instantly because it makes remarks or stereotypes almost instantly that would not make sense scientifically. And I think that we're talking about algorithms and stuff, and I think that's a big part of it, because you can have a developer that's saying, well, those 50 drones go take that house down, but why is it that house, what's in it? And sometimes, again, the bias that comes from a developer and what they're making, especially in their AI, is that the ethical thing, and is that why they should be held accountable?
So would you want the robots to be able to make their own decisions as well? Because if you look at it, like the one right people have in war is self-preservation. And quite frankly, if we have these advanced machines that are killing humans, the chances of you surviving are slim to none. I mean, I could be walking to the BSB and then I'm in a wooden box in 2 minutes, I wouldn't even see it coming, but if it was a human force invading, I would at least have the slightest chance to take cover, leave something, right? But if we have these robots making decisions, then one, they could turn on the person commanding them. Two, I don't think we could put we couldn't put the responsibility on one person, because can you imagine an all-out war in 2020 with robots? I mean, that one person that programmed everything would make genocides look tiny if they took all credit for it. And also, what would be the point in having a war where it's just robots fighting robots, because then humans would just turn it into another sport, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, if you're making these killing machines, then they do have to be able to decide for themselves. But then that ties into like your first question, except
Yeah.
instead of creatures, make it robots. Should these
Beings,
robots
yeah.
have rights? Yeah.
See, that's a good point, because that's what I had thought at first too. I was like, well, then it's just gonna become like another like Coliseum type thing, and I would pay to watch it. I know I would. Like, I'm not ashamed to say that I would watch two robots fight. That'd be entertaining. It'd be so interesting. And also, it would just be super interesting. Like, anyways, but yeah, then what becomes the point of war? And then it's like, well, you're asserting dominance, but like no one's dying, so is dominance asserted in other ways? And like, yeah, obviously we know it is, because we've seen dominance asserted in other ways, and that's sort of where obviously the question is at right now, where everyone's like, I don't know.
I feel like we should, because like
Mhm.
we'd assume that human life is worth more than
Mhm.
robot soldiers. So I definitely think it'd be better to, and you still lose material. So I guess that would still be dominance, like you're losing, metal or whatever instead of
Yeah.
human life. But it reminds me of Isaac Asimov's law of robotics, which is number 1, don't harm humans. Number 2, obey orders, and number 3, protect yourself. So like basically kind of creating an ethical decision-making tree for robots. And then also like I think self-driving cars right now, they're trying to decide like, oh, should I run over one pedestrian following the law or run over like 5 that aren't? It's like if someone's jaywalking and you have to take a turn or something, then like would you rather kill more people who aren't following the law or kill less who aren't? It's like stuff like that. But I definitely think we should. But then the bigger question is like the government or private or the developer, right? And I definitely think the government has used people as scapegoats. Like you would scapegoat the developer when the government is what took the person's work and put it into war. So I definitely think we should, but it's like no one's going to agree how to ethically use it. And I feel like the government would take over and use that for their own stuff and not care about the general public's view of ethics and how to maximize the use of the robot soldiers without, just murdering everyone.
No, yeah, totally. I definitely get what you're saying. Yeah.
I think war would still have I don't think in terms of war, I think it would be just as impactful, because somewhat cynically right now, human lives all our soldiers' lives it's just material, right? If I lose 50 Marines, well, that's a lot of material I've lost. Yeah, it's training, yeah, the families, but it's still the material, right? Human life is a material in war. And so we're just swapping robotic programming for, societal programming, basically. So the war would probably get more destructive, right? Because it doesn't take much to kill a human being. It takes a very small, amount of force, and you can end human life. But robots, they don't complain about water. I'm tired. No, you're not. They don't have any limits on what they can carry. They can carry hundreds and hundreds of pounds of armor. So you would have to be more destructive to eliminate the enemy's forces. And so I think another ethical question is, what would happen to the bystanders and the people between two armies, right?
Yeah, that's sort of what, when I had first read the question, I was like looking through ethical dilemmas. That's what I was like, well, that's why I asked the biased question. Like, they're going to go out. My thing is, would they go after bystanders, and then who's accountable? Is it the robot, or is it the developer or the government?
Okay. I think the question too is also, how would they measure that, right? Because if there's one enemy robot in a building, but they're basically all shooting tanks at each other because they're massive robots, I mean, a tank eventually will blow up a building. And so I think that's the question too, is how does that company's bias come in? Because obviously the company wants the most efficient weapons. The most efficient weapon means it eliminates the enemy the quickest and most effectively. But if that enemy happens to be sitting on human shields, I guess that's also like, how do you hold that accountable? But then the other thing too is, should that developer be held accountable for producing the product that they said they were going to produce, right? I think it would come into like how we measure collateral damage now is, yeah, it was really unfortunate we blew up that compound and killed all those people, but we got our guy. Do we hold that bomber manufacturer or that pilot? No, we just say it's war. And I think that would happen more, especially to countries that wouldn't be able to maintain a robotic military, right? Is that you would just have superpowers tossing their robots at each other, destroying insert village here, and there wouldn't be any consequence because I don't have to listen to families saying, well, my son or daughter died, and I don't have to listen to companies saying blah, blah, blah. All I have to see is, oh, we lost another one. Well, let's go buy some more, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's a close analogy to nuclear weapons, actually, because right now we have, like, you know, agreements like, oh, let's not use that on civilians. So I wonder if it would be like that, where, you know, all the countries come together and agree, like, we won't target civilians or something like that. You definitely bring up, like, really interesting points, but it's really interesting that I feel like nuclear weapons are a lot of parallels, and we have a lot of administration legislation around that because of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. I didn't think about it being similar to nuclear weapons, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a smart point. I'm
How
gonna
would
start thinking
you
about that.
also like, what would you
Yeah.
do regarding like robot discrimination on targets? Because like if I'm a soldier invading a city that has just gotten, you know, air raided, and I walk into a building and there's a mother holding her child in the corner, I'm not gonna shoot her, obviously, because that would be, I would not morally be able to do that. But that would not be that big of a decision to the robot, right? But then how do you discriminate? Like, say the mother turns on me and stabs me in the back, right?
Mhm.
Then okay, maybe I should have defended myself. Like robot's probably going to put the risk of that happening over the human. So you'd have to teach the robots to properly discriminate, and there would be way too many discrepancies. And then what about, you know, us humans? We have burial and post-death practices that we we practice, like we may bury or cremate our dead. Like with the robot, it's easy. Pick up some back to Microsoft. They'll know what to do with it. But what about the humans that the robot killed? Do the
Exactly.
humans or do the robots get programmed to properly, uh, you know, follow
Take care of
whatever,
the
and
body.
also yeah, take care of the body, and then how would they know what to do with the body? Because you come across someone that practices Islam, and their right is going to be different than someone who practices Christianity, or someone that wants to be cremated, or you know, there's too many options. How would you deal with that?
Yeah.
I think very interestingly is that like there's a lot of stuff that we already have right now, policies and procedures that would be very applicable. Humans have got very good at fighting war, and we've gotten very good at removing the humanity from war. I mean, right now it's illegal for a U.S. soldier who's killed someone to touch that, like to go through that body and do anything with that body that isn't like directly contributing to the mission, right? So I don't think a U.S. soldier can't help bury someone he just killed now. I don't think a U.S. robot would even be worried about that. And then on the topic of discrimination, yeah, that's a good question. And I think there'd be a really big incentive for companies is that discrimination would be very hard and very legal, a lot of problems. So it's a lot easier just to sacrifice that first robot. You know, it walks in the house, it sees baby and mom, and then, you know, turns around and is surprised that baby was actually a bomb. You know, well, we lost unit 1, who cares? Well, unit 2 and 3 can just, you know, eliminate the target, right? So humans have to discriminate because there is a threat to their well-being, but it's a robot, right? I don't care if I lose 4,000 of them because I can get 10,000, right? And it just means the attrition of war can be far more brutal, right? You could find out where the enemy sniper is by just saying, hey, robot, go stand out there real quick. Up, got shot, that building, blow it up, right? And so militarily, why would I worry about the discrimination and that split-second decision when I can just walk in, get shot, not get shot, and then handle the situation from there? There's no reason, or it doesn't seem like there would be much of a reason to have that. Which is that another ethical question? Is should we force our robots to try to think through something, or should we continue just to play, you know, war more like a game, right? No one thinks anything about their digital assets and whatever video game you're playing. So should I care about a physical robot? And yeah.
See, Bronson,
fair.
you and I grew up in very different environments. I grew up in post-Soviet Russia. So in my country, we send back the bodies of the victims back to the country, back to the family, to do as they need to. I know American soldiers aren't allowed to touch the bodies. I personally have a problem with that. But that's outside
Yeah.
my area. But like, I guess I don't know. Like, I don't want to deviate too far from that question because that still bothers me. Like, even just because that person died doesn't mean that their postmortem rights have been taken away, right? Like, say the building is burning down, God is in there, and it kills the person. I would want that robot to prioritize getting that body back, making sure that it has proper rights, everything. I wouldn't want that building to collapse and do something which that person would not have done to their body, right? To me personally, that's a big issue. I wouldn't want to leave those kind of people behind. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's a great response. We're cutting it close, so I am going to skip this next question. I do love that everyone's had very thought-provoking answers to this. Thanks, I appreciate it. Designer babies, yeah, we're going to skip them. Sorry, babies, but you're designer. So I want to talk about the biggest ethical dilemma in science ethics, and it's, should we just stop doing science altogether? And it goes from, a lot of scientists and ethicists believe we have the best and most productive parts, and it leads to our question that we just talked about. We make the most breakthroughs in science and war, and it always comes at the devastation of people's lives. So should we ethically and morally stop doing science where we are right now if it's going to harm people's lives? So it's the question over, is progression equal, or if not more important than human life? And yeah, we're cutting it close. So I would love to discuss it. So quick little discussion, even though this is obviously the biggest topic that they talk about in science ethics at the moment. So there's no way we can jam pack it in 8 minutes or 2 years. Frankly, they've been discussing this for over 20 something years now. So yeah, I'm just curious to hear people's thoughts.
I don't think you can stop, right? Because what is the alternative to this systematic, scientific, and learning, right? Because if you're going to end science, why would I educate anyone? Like, why do I need to educate, right? Do we just regress into, where we were as in like the Dark Ages? Do we just regress back to that where we're all dogmatically obsessed with religion and, fairy tales and stuff? Because what do we replace science with is the thing. And I don't think we would have anything that we found that it's better, right? Science brings a lot of bad, but so does believing that that woman over there who stopped me from sneezing is a witch, right? So I think I don't think you can even consider it, because you can't just tear it down, because there would be a vacuum. And what do we expect to fill that, right? Science has done a lot of bad, but it's also done tremendous good, right? Arguably, we live in the best time to ever have lived in for any human, right? I can turn on my desk lamp over there and go get ice water over there and heat up my food over there. This is an incredible time to live in, and it's only becomes with science. And yes, war is always bad, and we do a lot of horrible, horrible things, but people who should be dying aren't dying, and people who, pandemic example, right? If we don't have science, we'd just be sitting here going, well, this whole coughing thing really sucks. What are we going to do about that? But now we're, 8 months into a pandemic, and we have multiple treatment patterns, and multiple vaccines are being, tested right now. We've learned more about this disease than we learned about diseases for the previous 50,000 years in 7 months. So I don't think we can discredit science because of some bad by forgetting the overwhelming good, right, that we've had access to.
Right, and I just feel like science is such a broad term because I took a full class about like what is science, and it's just the systematic study of something, right? Like every subfield of science is just a systematic study of something, and I mean, how are we supposed to do anything with the world if we don't study it and understand it, you know? And I feel like this question is almost kind of the fear mongering of like AI and systematic, all that kind of stuff, where it's like, I definitely agree that there's problems, but then it's like, look at all the great things AI is doing for the world today, you know? And then, especially like what Bronson was saying, yeah, vaccines, understanding diseases, and then, you know, maybe maximizing agriculture, maximizing food, all of that. So it's like, we shouldn't stop. I mean, science is just studying and understanding the world and developing it further. I think the bigger part is like we shouldn't stop it. We should be careful about the regulation and the ethical question that people forget. So it's not we shouldn't stop, but we should keep doing it, but be careful about it because you're getting to places that we can actually permanently change the world with like designer babies and all of that stuff. So it's the bigger question is how do we be ethical and moral and aware while doing science, not whether we should stop it or not. I feel like the big when people say like we should stop, they're just saying we should stop using it for unethical reasons.
I'm so glad you said that because that leads to the next slide perfectly. um, yeah, and lastly, I did want to talk about how to be more ethical, or at least start to learn about ethics in your everyday life. I think, yeah, we talked about it, but why is it important to me if I can't apply it? And you know, like that's just a fact of the matter. Like I'm not gonna learn about this and just like, okay. And I think I wrote some stuff down, obviously, but be collaborative. Like, I think we had a Socratic discussion, you know, and I was able to hear everybody's different perspectives, and I was able to understand where you guys were coming from, and vice versa, because we're applying what we ethically and morally believe and teaching each other different values in different ethical perspectives. And then, secondly, yeah, trust your instinct because your instinct is your moral compass to an extent, you know. Um, but like just because you trust your instinct doesn't mean you can't have an open mind to something new. And that goes back to the be collaborative thing, where it's like our instinct is telling us what we think and why it's wrong. So listen to that. But also, if someone's like, but I don't think that's wrong, and here's why, be open to listening to it and widening your perspective of what others believe ethics means. Because if we do that in research meetings. We discuss, well, that's why that didn't work, and that's why this works instead, or this is why I think this would work. Why can't we apply that to our ethics that we're doing on a daily basis? Because even something as simple as keeping a door open for someone, you made a micro ethical decision, you know? And I think we're looking at big scale and very small scale things in our research and apply that ethics to your everyday life so it shines through your work. Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me stop sharing. There we go. That worked. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about ethics. Share, could you, or anyone, or any of the co-hosts, because I don't know how many of you are on here. Could someone send the...
Yeah. Let me share my screen real quick, and then Isha, if you want to send the Google form in the chat.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. That was a really interesting discussion to listen into. But before